Okay, the Union Pacific Laser Kit, Union Pacific Depot Station Laser Kit is completed, at least as completed as I'm going to take it at this stage. And this is the final video dealing with this. Later, I plan to detail some parts of the interior, and I'll probably devote an episode or two to that. And I'd really like to do that because it's a structure that will show off interior details nicely. And so that'll be sometime in the future because I want to get back to working on the layout. But to wrap up this section, this project, before I show you the depot close up, I'll step through some of the things that I've done to get it to this point, the final stages of construction, and that's going to be on this series of graphics we're going to step through. So there'll be a number of them, about a dozen or so, maybe a few more, and I'll take you through the process as it went along. The first graphic here shows preparing to do the shingles on the roof, and you'll notice that the roof is not completely assembled. I haven't done the portion over the dispatcher's office, but you have to do it in sequence because the way the shingles go on. I have a little square there in my drafting pencil and pencil pointer from back in my high school days of mechanical drawing. And what I've been doing in this first graphic is on the horizontal lines that line the courses of shingles, I've drawn some vertical lines for referencing the side-to-side positioning of the shingles. And notice that there are two lines on each side. And what that does is it reflects the offset between the various rows of shingles for the courses of shingles. And you need this. You need to make this line right on your work so you can be sure to line the shingles up properly. And I did that on both sides of the roof before I started putting the strips of shingles on. On this next graphic, you'll see the one side of the roof, and this has got all the shingles applied, and notice they're not trimmed on the end. That'll come later, but the shingles are all down on this side of the roof, and it's being held there in the Panavise, and I'll talk about the Panavise at the end here, some of the tool ideas that you might find handy. And the next picture shows a test fit of the roof on the structure itself with the shingles in it, just to see how it looks. And you'll notice the pile of backing material there in front of the structure. Putting these shingles on is a very careful, slow, I don't want to say tedious process. It's really quite rewarding when you get the final appearance look there, and even before they're painted they look pretty nice. And but you take one strip of shingles at a time, peel the backing off, and carefully position it along the horizontal lines. And that's your roof is lined up that way, the shingles are lined up, and you get the good appearance that you can see already coming out in this. And this next graphic shows the roof completed without the chimneys installed, and there are several views here of how it fit onto the structure because I wanted to check my test fit. You notice the chimneys are not installed yet, but they're the cutout holes for the chimneys. And you can see the front view and the front top view and one of the end views as we step through these. And then you can see the back side of the station. Notice the rubber bands on there. Part of this is to hold the roof down so I made sure it was conformed right and make sure I didn't have any real curl in it that I have to deal with. And fortunately everything was good. So then I moved on to the next step, and that was installing the chimneys, which I've already colored and installed. And I used pan pastels on the chimneys too, a deep red, a brick red. And you notice in front there are two principal colors of pan pastels that I'm going to use to color these shingles. Now, if you're not familiar with pan pastels, they're a super soft pastel that's applied with a foam brush. They have foam brushes of various sizes, and I'll show some later. But the foam brushes, you use that to rub the pastel on, and you put it on in light strokes. You can see the very start of it there. Now what I'm using, remember I said in a prior video that the Union Pacific practice was to use asphalt shingles and then to use a Kentucky green tint to the shingles, actually applied as a paint. Painting roofs is not that common today, but it was much more common in prior years. And so what you see here is I'm putting on the first coat of gray, and I used Payne's Dark Gray. Pan pastel. It's Payne's Dark Gray, which is a gray that has just a little bit of a blue cast to it. And I put that on with the brushes. You can see that I'm starting. I've already done the one side of the roof, and I'm starting on the other side. And if you go to the next graphic, you'll see that after the first coat, I sprayed fixative, Krylon fixative, to fix the pastel. You have to do that because the pastel will rub off and come off if you don't. And notice it looks all modeled. It's sitting there in my airbrush booth, which I use when I'm ever spraying this stuff, because it sucks all the vapors out of the house, and you don't have all the odors from the paint. And it looks kind of modelly and everything, and you won't get even coverage. The trick of this is you're going to be doing multiple thin coats. So this next graphic shows the second coat being applied to the roof, the second base color coat of the Payne's Gray, Payne's Dark Gray. And then the graphic of this shows the final third coat of Payne's Gray. So you're getting that asphalt shingle gray-blue look underneath it. Then I went in and had applied a couple of light applications of phthalo green soft pastel to give it that green cast, and you'll see that in the finished model. The next thing I moved on to in the next graphic was the final steps of building some of the exterior details. And these are the parts for the three sets of concrete steps that go up into the building, and the loading ramp at one end of the building. And the loading ramp is built up the same way the real loading ramp is built up. And you have all the supporting structure underneath. You see the first graphic, the parts there. The second, I've been cutting the parts out and I've started to build the basic frame for the loading ramp. And then the next graphic shows the loading ramp frame before I put the platforms on the loading ramp. And the steps are all completed, glued together. These pieces that go on the loading ramp that form the decking are self-adhering plywood. Finally, this is a test fit of the loading ramp and the steps to the structure. And this shows how it fits against the structure and what I'm doing with the positioning, making sure everything fits properly and closes up against the structure nice. It looks like details really applied to the real structure. You can see the steps there to the side. And the final graphic here shows the structure, the base of the structure, with the steps glued to the edge of the structure. And I'll show you later how I reinforce that. I noticed that I painted the base, the actual exposed base, with a aged concrete color acrylic paint as I did the steps, and then I applied a little bit of Payne's Gray to the center of the steps to look like the dirt and tracked in stuff off of shoes, because the concrete is going to absorb that just like a concrete driveway absorbs grease. And I'll show you a trick how to reinforce those steps glued there. So with these graphics, this shows you how I've completed these steps. Okay, you can see the station model is finished and it's all ready to go on layout. When I get the layout done, and that part of it that's going to go on the layout is a small junction town, fictitious town by the name of Warrenville. Yes, it sounds like Warrenton, but hey, it's my railroad. I can do what I want. And this was a really enjoyable project. I probably put between 40 and 50 hours in building this, but again, the sense of accomplishment you get out of building one of these laser kits is really good, because they do turn out a beautiful model when they're done. Some of the things that you can see here to finish up, the concrete steps with their weathering are placed before the doors. And you can see the roof has that gray but slightly greenish tint to it because of the Union Pacific practice of painting their roofs with the Kentucky green wash. And I added some extra details here. I'll show you as I pivot around to the side, or the end of the station here, one end, by the freight dock, loading dock. Notice that I positioned an oil drum used as a waste container with a push broom in it, and some cartons and drums, and a couple brake shoes there that maintenance crews would use as they're moving supplies in and out and using this. Also notice the Warrenville sign placard there. This is the detail I added to personalize it to my railroad. The interesting thing about this is that the Union Pacific often used these type of signboards on their stations, as all railroads usually did. And but the interesting thing is they were in a rectangle that had 45-degree corners, not a right angle corner. So I made these signs. First of all, I researched the typeface that the Union Pacific used, which was a form of sans serif Gothic lettering, but it was a slightly extended, and I actually found it online, found a very close cousin to it. I only had to modify the E. And there it is, two E's, move the centerpiece up slightly and shorten it. Otherwise, it was a dead ringer for the Union Pacific typeface. And I made the signs using good old PowerPoint, and treated as a graphic on PowerPoint, and reduced it to the proper size for the building, and also added the border, the thin black line border, which they often did on their signboards, had a thin black line border around the station name, and applied it to the station. And I applied it using a product thin film transfer tape. It's very, very thin, double-sided adhesive tape with a carrier on one side. So I printed these on cardstock, printed a bunch of copies so that I could screw up stuff and not be up the creek, and then found the three best and carefully positioned them on the station, and there you have the town of Warrenville station. So going further around the station here, we're looking at the back side of it, opposite the tracks, and here's the back side of the station. Again, I really like that green and white paint scheme. I think it looks really nice. And then we're going around to the other end of the station. Again, there's the Warrenville signboard, and you can see the nice architectural features of the trim at the peak of the roof, and a very, very pleasing looking structure. And again, back around to the track side of the station, and you can see the Warrenville sign over the office there, the cupola office for the dispatcher for the town. Now this kit is complete so far. The one thing I want to do is, as I said, detail some parts of the interior, because it's a very nice kit for having an interior that's visible, and light it with the LED lights. But that's a project down the road a bit, so I will get to that as another project, perhaps in several months, next year sometime, and I'll do some more videos on that, because I've got some ideas about how I want to do the interior. So that's the completed station. And a little bit of feature here next, I'm going to talk about some tools. Okay, one of the things I like to do is, when I talk about these kits, I bring up various little tools and stuff that I use, that little tricks of the trade, or as you might call it, or little things I've just started doing just at my own idea, or seen an idea and taken it and kind of run with it and modified it, and just talk about a few other things used in this project. The first thing, when I was rotating the model around, what I was using was something I made. I actually used this in my spray brush booth. It's actually a little turntable, and it's made by, I got two 1/8 inch pieces of plexiglass, about 10, 11 inches on a side. And you can see the underside here. I bought a Lazy Susan caster at Home Depot, so the total investment in parts here is about 10 bucks. And what it allows me to do is, if I'm airbrushing something or some model, I can put it on here and just turn it without having to touch the model. And for any of you that have done any airbrushing or spray painting, you know that's really frustrating when you have something small, you can't turn it and get at it. Well, this allows me to go from all sides and all angles. The other thing I did with it is, I didn't want to avoid painting the plexiglass too much. I used these small binder clips. You can get at Home Depot, the small size. And I'll just clip some paper to the top, over the edge of the plexiglass. And generally I'll just use newspaper. We all have newspaper lying around the house. And I'll clip a couple sheets to here and use it a couple times. And it gets too covered with paint and everything, I'll just tear it off and put on some more paper. But it's a handy little device. It's saved me a lot of grief. Okay, I mentioned I used acrylic aged concrete. This is a polyscale acrylic paint, model railroad paint. It's specifically called aged concrete. It's to look like concrete that's been in place for a while. And acrylic paints, because of their pigment, need to be well stirred. The problem is, when you have these small jars, stirring doesn't work out real well, because it's just hard to get it all broken up and well dispersed in the carrier. And you can notice, you can hear a rattling in there. Well, one of the things I start doing with my paints is I go to Amazon Prime, again, Amazon Prime, and for a couple bucks I buy these packages of 100 stainless steel ball bearings. I'll get a couple packages at a time, and I'll just drop 2 or 3 or 4 ball bearings into the paint jar when I first open it. And this really helps agitate the paint. Really keeps it well suspended and works far better than stirring. I do have a battery powered paint shaker too, but with these, with just hand shaking for about 15-20 seconds, you really get the paint well mixed. So stainless steel ball bearings, Amazon Prime, good old Amazon Prime. Here's the pan pastels that I used. Again, I talked about them on the earlier. These are that I used for the roof coloring. They're very easy to work with. You put them on in very thin, repeated coats, and you use these foam applicators that they come in various sizes and shapes and everything, and they have some very small applicators on you can put on the end of the little brush holder they give you. And I even used it to color the chimneys and sealed it, and then I used some of the dark gray to give a sooty appearance to the brick on the chimney. So I like the appearance that gives. This is one of several glues that I use. This one's called Gale Force 9 Hobby Glue. I guess Gale Force 9 means it's going to take Gale Force 9 winds to dislodge something with this. It's a cyanoacrylate. It's a fairly thick cyanoacrylate, a super glue. And so its cure time is in minutes, but I used it to glue down the details on the loading dock and a few other things. Another thing that I use, found very handy, this is a machinist square. This works really well with my magnetic assembly base because it is steel and I can lock it in place with magnets to make everything square. Again, I bought this at a model train show from one of the tool dealers. I think it was $4 or $5, not very much. And again, a handy thing to have, a small machinist square. And then there are also Zona squares, which is similar, but this has a scale on it. It's a thin piece, and this is really handy for measuring small pieces and keeping things nice and square. This is the thin film transfer tape. You can get this from hobby or art supply stores. Graphic artists use it when they're making mock-ups and designs. It's very, very thin. I mean, far thinner than a human hair in thickness, and it comes with this brown backing on it, so when you unroll it you've got one sticky side exposed. And you can see here from this worksheet, this is the Warrenville station signs that I made, the ones I didn't use, and I just basically taped the backing side of the tape down and taken the pieces that I cut out from the cardstock for the sign and placed them on the tape so they already were stuck to the tape, and then cut around the sign and lifted it off the backing, and that's how I applied it to the station. And once this stuff takes hold, it will take hold. It's not going to give up. So thin film transfer tape, another handy thing to use. This is a Panavice. Now it's starting to get a little expensive. This is I don't know, $40, $50, but I bought this tool a long time ago. But it's a really handy thing for working on small stuff. It's got an adjustment here. You can rotate it around, move it in directions. You can set it to any particular angle. It's your third hand. Believe me, there's a lot of times, those of you that worked on these kits, you wish you could grow a third hand, a third arm sometimes, because you wind up only having two hands and you can't handle everything with it. Another thing that I actually got this as a deal. I purchased an OttLite, a floor OttLite for Kathy as for something to help her work with her knitting and stuff, and she likes it okay. I'm using it down here now. She doesn't use it very much. But part of the deal was I got this small desktop light to go with it, and these are really good. They're a really great work light. It's very portable, and I use it a lot on the railroad, carry places, plug it in, and it's a very good work surface light. And that pretty much concludes everything I've got to say so far about the kit. Again, it's a lot of fun. I really encourage you to try a laser kit. They're challenging, but when you get done, you have something you can really be proud of, and they're very enjoyable. It's an enjoyable way to spend time on it. I could be down here for a couple hours working on this and just kind of forget all the problems of the world going on around us today. It seems a good thing to be able to do. And my next thing is I've got to clean up this boar's mess that I created down here, because that seems to be the way I work on these things, and things get a little cluttered. So my next project is cleaning things up. Oh, one final thing I neglected to mention. You get a lot of scraps and stuff left over when you build one of these kits. You can see this pile of scraps here, but you don't want to throw it out right away, because you'll have little parts, a lot, particularly those that have adhesive backing on them, that you can cut out to make up for mistakes you're going to make. And you're going to make mistakes, okay? But it's just because you're working with such thin stuff. So keeping all these things gives you a supply of things where you can cut out pieces to substitute where something has not gone on right or gotten broken putting it on. And I mentioned that because, let me invert the station here. Edge gluing these steps to the base would not work real well, not a strong joint. So once they were glued, when they were set up and just tenuously held there, I came in with these pieces, scrap pieces of the thin plywood that had adhesive backing on them, and I lapped across the joint, half to the base, half to the step, to give it extra strength. So they'll remain stuck onto the edge of the base. Now the thing is, when this thing is set in the layout, this makes such a little thin rise in the height of the station, you'll never notice it. It'll be set into the scenery, so it'll just disappear. And as I said, I've got the station sitting on the base, so I can lift it off and work on the interior. I'm not going to pull it off here. And what I'll do is, once this is all done for the interior, I will run small screws through here in the corners to make sure it snugs down on the base all the way around. And yet I'll be able to undo the screws and take it off if I have to work on anything inside the station. So that's the Union Pacific Station project complete, and hope you have a good day and enjoy playing with your trains.